to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest-running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
This is episode 309, and in today's episode we talk about choosing a headlamp for hiking. If you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published, and if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. In episode 35 of the Australian Hiker podcast, we talk about which light for hiking when we compared headlamps to lanterns to handheld torches. And in that episode, it was just a general overview of which lights you can look at and what are the options for hiking in general. In this episode, we're going to talk more specifically about what to look for when choosing a headlamp, which really is probably the main light that you're going to see people using from a hiking perspective. And in fact, a few years ago, we did a survey, and roughly 90% of people were using a headlamp as their main source of light for an overnight hiking adventure. So first up, why choose headlamps over other forms of lighting? And I suppose probably the main thing here is if you are using a set of tracking poles or you're preparing dinner, having your hands free is probably one of the biggest benefits. And in fact, if you're hiking when it's dark and you're using tracking poles, really you don't have a lot of other choice. So I think really headlamps are the best form of lighting for hiking.
And 90% of hikers agree, Tim.
They are. Well, and again, this was not just the survey. Anecdotally, I can't remember the last time I saw a hiker not using a headlamp and using either a lantern, which tends to be more for use inside the tent, or using a handheld torch. I really cannot remember the last time I saw a handheld torch being used by a hiker. Campers, yes, but certainly not hikers.
No, that's right. And you know, we'll talk about this, but there are obvious reasons, I think, why headlamps are so popular.
So there are so many types or models and brands of headlamps on the market, and really you need to virtually work out why you are going to choose one light over another, and hopefully when you start putting a few of these considerations together, that will help narrow down what you're looking at. Now, in no particular order, first thing we're going to look at is lumens. Now, you can go online and go on Google and type in definition of lumen, and you will get some quite in-depth and technical definitions of what a lumen is. But put simply, it's basically how bright a light is, and it's how much power it's putting out and how much brightness it's putting out. When you look through the large range of headlamps on the market, the range of brightness available is quite extreme. The really base grade ones might be down as low as 30 lumens, although having said that, a lot of headlamps will have the ability to be used on what they class as low power, and they can often go lower than that. Mm-hmm. All the way up to a typical hiking style headlamp around about 1100 lumens. Now, at the time of this podcast, I looked at what was available, and really once you started getting into the commercial style headlamps, I came across one that was over 2,500 lumens.
Whoa, that's a lot of blinded people.
A lot of blinded people, and also was visible from 600 metres away. So, yeah, these aren't. Yeah, but the downside of that particular light, it also weighed 500 grams, and that's going to give you a sore neck if you're going to be using that for long periods.
When we used to go diving, Tim had this torch with a power pack that would attach to his vest, and we used to laugh about it being able to burn bitumen at 100 metres. Yeah, it's brightness isn't always the best thing.
No, and we will talk about that a bit more later on. And I suppose that sort of reinforces that surely more is better, and it's not always the case. Next is light beam shape and distance. Now, we talked about distance just briefly, but you'll find that most headlamps will have two main modes. They'll have a long distance spotlight that goes for distance rather than breadth. And then you'll have another more of a floodlight that will, and it's more suited to working in close. You're not going to see a long way, but you're going to see reasonably brightly all around you from the ground upwards and close to where you're working.
So it'd be good for reading in your tent.
Yeah. And, it's no good having a really intense spotlight when you're just trying to read in your tent. So
It's like, I can't remember what they were called at school, where you had to follow the words that were lit up and it got faster. Yeah. That's what it would be like.
Yeah. So I think in that sort of instance through here, getting a headlight that's versatile, and as I said, most headlights these days will come with the ability of using the spot, the broader light, or a combination of both. So it really depends on what you're going to be using your light for. And as an example through here, if all you're doing is using it around camp, using it to read, you're probably only going to need that broader light. You don't need something that's going to go a big distance. But alternatively, if you are hiking in a fairly open area and the grounds or the footing's a bit treacherous underneath and you want to get good visibility of what's coming up ahead, having something with a decent spotlight is going to make a big difference. So my most powerful headlamp at the moment has a range of 155 metres. Now, I only ever tend to use that when I am hiking in open territory and the ground is a bit erratic and I'm not sure what's there and I want to see what's underfoot. But that's a light that I don't use that often.
And I'm very appreciative of that.
And alternatively as well, if you're hiking in dense bushland and the trail's a bit windy rather than being straight, having something that can go 100 metres isn't going to be particularly useful.
That's right.
So it really depends on the trails that you're doing and how often you're going to be using them. Typically, if a light is going to be that powerful and that have that longer beam, that also implies it's a slightly bigger and bulkier headlamp. And strangely enough, my main headlamp that I like to use is 88 grams, and I find that quite useful. But the more powerful one is 100 grams, and it's only an extra 12 grams, but I really do notice the extra weight. For the sake of just a few grams extra or a few grams less, you're still getting a reasonably powerful sort of light without going to the extreme.
And I think the point is that the weight is on your head, so you are quite sensitive. You don't normally walk around with, even 88 grams on your head.
No, so it's the sort of thing that trying to minimise what you have on your head is quite useful. And there are so many good headlamps on the market that are relatively lightweight and in that sort of 60, 70, 80 grams and some even lighter. My lightest one's is under 30 grams. And again, it makes a big difference when you don't have to have that extra weight if you don't need it. And I think for a lot of people, almost the assumption is, I need the most powerful light I can find. And before you do that, you really need to work out if that's what it is that you need. What I've gone through and done with this podcast and also the written version of it is to talk about general uses of a headlamp, and I've lumped them into three main categories. And the first one is as an emergency light or just for around the campsite. Now, if you're not into hiking at nighttime, even for short periods, there's no need to carry an immensely powerful light.
Yeah, that's right.
And in this sort of instance, I'm recommending something between around about 30 and 200 lumens. They're quite a common sort of light, particularly that sort of 200 lumen sort of category. Easy to find, and we'll talk about pricing more specifically, but also relatively cheap. If you want a good general all-purpose light, and this is one that fits pretty much everything that you're likely to do without necessarily doing really serious full-on long-distance night hiking, probably looking at a light of around about 200 to 350 lumens. That's quite a common light on the market. And again, there are quite a number of brands and models that'll fit into that sort of category. Then if you're going on to serious night hiking, and the example I would use here is the longest periods I tend to hike for at night time is probably up to around about 3 hours. So I'll continue hiking into past the end of the day. It'll start becoming dark, and then I'm sort of, it's pitch black for a period of up to about 3 hours. And a good example of that is I did one particular day on the Bibbulmun track in Western Australia, and I ended up hiking, would have been 2.5 to 3 hours into the night because I wanted to get a particular distance, and I do enjoy hiking at night time. But particularly for unfamiliar areas, I want a good lighting capacity. And for that one, at that time, I was using something around about the 450 lumen mark. These days, my light of choice is around about 600 lumens, but I don't necessarily have to use it at that capacity. I can tune it down a bit, which will extend the battery life, but also give you the opportunity to see what's there. Now, as I mentioned, my most powerful light at the moment is 1100 lumens, and it tends to be used for very specific circumstances. I don't use it that often, but if I'm trying to do something fine motor skill, even around the house, or I know I'm going to be hiking in an area that is very open and very treacherous footing, that's when I'll drag that one out. So it has even though it's a very versatile sort of light that can be cranked right down, the additional weight on it means that I'm less likely to use that at the lower power. I'd rather use a headlamp that weighs less and use the bigger one for when I really need to use the high power.
I guess the problem is, though, you need to understand where you're going to be and therefore what you need for that particular environment, because you don't want to be carrying multiple headlamps with you. So you need to do some planning and you need to be understanding of the environment that you're going to be in.
So when choosing a headlamp for doing serious night hiking, what I will find is, and I'll use as an example here, the Bibbulmun track, where I will try and identify when it's going to be a full moon, very early in the morning while it's still dark, or having a full moon when it's very early in the evening, so sort of 5, 6, 6:30 at night time. So I've got the benefit of the full moon. And I must admit, for me, one of the best night hikes, or the best type of night hikes that I enjoy, is when the moon is so bright and the trail is so well lit up because of the moon, I can turn my headlamp off.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it?
But you can only do that when you know you've got a good, reliable trail and you're not likely to trip over and injure yourself. But in that sort of instance there, I'll have a dedicated day, or whether it be morning or evening, that I know I'm going to be night hiking, and then I will do 2-3 hours into that dark period just because I do enjoy it so much. Now, most headlamps, as I mentioned, can be adjusted from lower light level to a higher range. So again, if you're buying one of the better quality headlamps, you'll find that you've got that ability to adjust how much power they're putting out. And the less power you're using, the longer the duration will last.
That's right. And I think that's probably another one of those key considerations. And, depends on how long you're going to be out hiking. If it's a multi-day or multi-week trip, you do want the comfort of knowing it's going to last a long time.
And we'll talk more specifically about batteries in a moment. From here, let's look at batteries. And this is probably one of the biggest variations in talking about headlamps. The type of battery you use is one of personal choice, but it can also be dependent on the headlamp that you use. My 1100 lumen light, the only option you've got is to use the dedicated rechargeable battery that comes with that light. It means I can, if I want to, buy a second one if I'm going to be doing really long periods and want that extra battery backup. You can also find that some headlamps will come with a rechargeable battery, but you can swap them out and use just stock standard alkaline or lithium batteries. Now, in regard to rechargeable batteries, as I said, you've got the option of using what's there or buying good quality AAA or AA's, depending on what the light happens to take. And most lights these days do tend to be based around AAA batteries. But if you're buying rechargeable AAA or AA batteries, buy good quality ones. The cheap ones tend to be not very durable as far as length of the battery, of life of the battery itself, but it's also about how long the battery will last while it's in use. So I think in my case, I will often buy a headlamp that comes with a rechargeable battery, and I'll carry a spare set of AAAs because I also use AAAs for my voice recorder. So having them there makes them a bit more versatile.
And also, you want to avoid the chance of running out of light. So, you do need a little bit of a backup unless you're doing an overnight or maybe a couple of days. But it's surprising how your headlamp might drain if you're using extra power, but also sometimes if you inadvertently knocked it on while it's in your pack and you didn't realise, and you've drained the battery and you have no light at all.
The other thing that can be an issue as well is if you're hiking in really cold weather or snow conditions, that will also suck the power out of batteries more so than you're hiking in warmer conditions. So you might have to make extra allowance for that.
Or keep your headlamp in your sleeping bag.
If I am using disposable batteries, I will use lithium batteries. They're not cheap. And I must admit, I tend to look for when they come on special in the supermarkets, and I'll buy a batch then because I've got a number of things like scales and a number of other power devices around the house that you do use disposable batteries. And I just find that the higher grade, higher quality batteries like the lithiums will last longer, and for the use you get out of them, they're better value for money. I find the really cheap batteries, the old red batteries
alkalines.
That well, not even the alkalines, even the stock standard lead acid batteries that you still can get, they just don't last very long. So you're going through pair after pair if you're doing a lot of night hiking or using a lot of power heavy pieces of equipment. But that means while they might be cheaper, you're having to carry more of them. So what you might be saving in the initial purchase price, you're spending more in the long term.
You're running through them faster.
And you're carrying more weight as well.
Yeah, and from an environmental perspective, you can't get away from the fact that you will need a battery of some kind, whether it's a rechargeable or a replaceable item. So, think about the usage and get the best quality you can afford so you don't have to change them out as often.
Now, back on rechargeable batteries, you'll find that if you've only got one rechargeable battery and it's, you plan on doing, so as an example, 4 hours of night hiking, but at the power usage you're likely or that you personally are going to be using your headlamp at, you might find that it might only last 2 or 3 hours. So in that instance, you're probably going to have a spare battery. With the headlamps that I buy, I've got a number of the same brand. That means I've got multiple rechargeable batteries that have come with the headlamps, so I can bring 2 or 3 or 4 of these, so I could pretty much get through the entire night if I really need to. And these rechargeable batteries are pretty lightweight. Having said that, though, the other option is if I'm going to be hiking, let's say for an hour, which means I won't need to actually recharge it while I'm on trail or swap it over when I'm on trail, what it means is I can get into camp at the end of the night, I'll pull out my power bank and I'll charge the headlamp back up again just while I'm sitting there, or even charge it up while it's overnight. And it means that I don't have to carry a number of the batteries specifically for one device. I can just recharge. So it does come down to what are you going to be doing? And as I said, for me, probably 3 hours hiking in the dark is probably about my maximum. But that always depends on what the conditions are. I would dearly love to be able to hike in an open area with a full moon that's there for long periods, and you've got that really bright sort of environment for a nighttime perspective that you can just keep on going for hours on end.
Most people wouldn't necessarily carry a power bank because we do, not just to charge the phones, but also the recording equipment and other things that we take with us. So, that might be a bit of overkill for you, but maybe not. If it's a few days and you want to make sure that even your phone is still in use, you may as well invest in a power bank and you can charge your headlamp at the same time.
Now, again, in the survey we ran on this one, non-rechargeable battery users, so disposable batteries, was 47.5%, and rechargeable battery users were 52.5%. So it's almost an even sort of split. Now, that may have changed in the last couple of years, so we will rerun the survey again to see what it's like. But it is one of those sort of things. It depends on how much you are using your headlamp. If you only are using your headlamp just around camp, and you might only be doing it once every 2 or 3 weeks, or even 2 or 3 days, and then nothing for 3 or 4 weeks, you find that disposables may well suit what you need.
And for me, if it's really dark in the middle of the night when I need to get up to go, I might use the headlamp. But if it's not really, really, really dark, I have the headlamp, but I won't turn it on. I find that I can see more without it, which is a really interesting thing. So think about that too. So I'm a very light user of a headlamp, and Tim would be at the other end of the category, I think.
The next one is comfort. Now, you've got this thing on your head, and again, it's the sort of thing where you really try and avoid having anything on your head apart from a hat if you best can help it. And if you've got to have something, you want it to be as comfortable as possible. Comfort can cover a couple of things. Most headlamps these days will come with a wide neoprene style of elastic headband, and providing you
something stretchy that fits over your head.
Yeah, basically. And providing you don't loan it to every man and his dog and they adjust it because they've got a different size head, it means once you've adjusted it to your own head, you put it on and you know it's going to fit. But again, having something comfortable is critical. And these days, as I mentioned, it's pretty common for most headlamps to have very comfortable headbands on them. The other thing that can impact on comfort is you will find there are some, but not many, headlamps on the market that will have the lighting unit at the front of your head, which is where they're always going to be, and they move the battery unit to the back of your head. Now, the battery unit is probably the heaviest part of a headlamp, and that means that there's going to be slightly more weight at the back, but I find that better than having all the weight at the front.
I just prefer a lighter headlamp.
Yeah. In the case of the really high-grade, high-level, really powerful headlamps, they typically always tend to have the battery at the back and the headlamp and the actual lighting unit at the front. But what I find with this style is that the lighting unit has been stripped back so much, it's almost like you haven't got it on there. You've almost just got the band. Now, the disadvantage with this style of headlamp is if you're a sort of person that lies on your back and reads in your tent at nighttime, not particularly comfortable.
No, that's right.
But I mean, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what type of headlamp I use. I will always lie on my side to read. So either type of headlamp will work well for me. The other thing to consider is price. Now, you can spend an awful lot on headlamps. And again, that one I mentioned before, the 2,500 lumen one, is roughly around about $1,100.
Whoa.
So, yeah, you pay for what you get, and it's not going to be that what you...
You've got to be serious about walking around at night in the dark.
Yeah, and it typically is for caving and for other activities. You're not going to be using it for hiking. But again, even then, I think you'd probably be hard-pressed to recharge it off a power bank. It'd probably use so much power over that sort of period. So price-wise, at the time of this podcast episode, you'll find that most typical headlamps that you'll buy on the Australian market range between $60 and the $200 mark. You can get some that are less than that. You can get some that are more, but between $60 and $200 is going to cover you pretty well. And again, for the cheaper end of the range, and this is for someone that just wants to wander around the campsite, going to the loo, setting up their tent, cooking at night time, but not necessarily night hiking, $60 to $120 will cover you quite well.
And it's a really good investment because pretty much, once you've got a decent headlamp, you don't really have to replace it. Unless you've lost it or you loaned it to someone.
Or you change the style of hiking that you're doing.
Or you change the style of hiking. But, pretty much if you think about what kind of hiking you're likely to do in the near and long term, it's an investment that will stay with you for quite a while.
Now, we talked about choosing headlamps. One thing, other thing to consider is headlamp etiquette. And if you're new to hiking, it's a bit of a sharp learning curve. But the thing we never talk about when it comes to headlamps is really how to use them. You've got to learn by experience.
Because people yell at you.
Yeah, and this goes a bit beyond standard etiquette, but it's a thing that to ensure that you don't upset your fellow hikers or, for that matter, yourself as well. One thing that falls under the etiquette category is don't blind other hikers. So you'll find that every headlamp, or just about every headlamp on the market that I've ever seen, you can actually tilt the lighting mechanism at the front. So you don't want it pointing straight out unless you are if you are leading a group of people or you're walking away and you want to see what's in the distance.
That's right.
Usually what you want it to do is have it more slightly pointed downwards. So again, not so much down that it's
Lighting up your shoes.
Lighting up your shoes, yeah. But it's more about if you look at somebody else, and that's what you've got to think of. If you turn to face somebody, are you going to blind them? And it's not just about saying, well, oh, geez, I'm sorry. You've just ruined their night vision for probably half an hour. So if you've come out to look at...
You're going to have to lead them away now.
Animal spotting or something like that, you really don't want to go through and do that. I've got a headlamp that the flexibility of the lighting unit is such I can actually point the lighting unit at my face. So you've got the ability to blind yourself. Now, you've got to be...
You don't want to do that either.
You've got to be deliberately trying to do that in that instance. But, I mean, most headlamps will have a range of motion from... Typically, it will go up, but normally you tend not to be much use for you there. If you want to look up, you tend to look up. But you want it pointing downwards, so when you are talking to somebody else, it's not blinding them. The other thing to think about is moving quickly and flashing light all over the camp. If you can think about young kids with torches at night time, the beams going everywhere. And again, it's amazing how much that can be irritating at night time. And if you've gone to bed and somebody else is wandering around outside and they're shining their headlamp in through the side of your tent, you've got to keep that in mind. So take that into account when you are moving around camp, particularly if you're the last one up, that you don't impact on other hikers who are trying to sleep. In that instance, it might be also the opposite. If you've got a reasonably powerful headlamp and you can actually shine it through your tent outwards, and again, that can also impact on other tents that happen to be close by. You'll find that a lot of headlamps do come with a red light mode, and that means that it's not particularly useful for reading, but the red light mode...
And it's not for what we think it is.
No. It's really about allowing you to see things, to see where you're going, not to read. And that does two things. It impacts less on other people, and it also impacts less on your night vision. But it also means the battery will last much, much longer. And you'll find that in some torches, using the red mode on a headlamp, you might find that it lasts 10, 20, 30 hours.
Yeah, that's right.
So again, it's what you are using it for. And if you haven't used the red mode on your headlamp, try it. It's worthwhile having a look to see if it's something that's going to be helpful to what you do.
Yeah, and it does give you enough light to... go for a short walk in the middle of the night and not distract too many people while you're doing it.
Now, if you have looked at the written version of this podcast, I've gone through and made a series of suggestions on what we use at the moment, but certainly have a look at that. As I said, there is so many options on the market. It really is a matter of which way you want to head from there. So as a final thought, the type of headlamp that you use is very much a personal choice. To ensure that you've made the right choice, you need to know why you're buying it. And then Jill mentioned earlier on, going for one of the cheaper lights is probably going to do everything you're ever going to want to need, except if you decide you really do love serious night hiking and then you'll go for a higher model or a more powerful model. Now, we own, I think, and again I say I do think I haven't gone through.
You say we. I'm not sure it's we. I think, you're clearly the gear freak when it comes to headlamps.
Yeah. We own, I think it's around about 8 headlamps. There are 4 of those that I will use regularly. Certainly the extremes, the really powerful one and the really low level light one, but I'll use them for specific reasons based on what I'm doing. And I can justify that because of the amount of night hiking that I do. It's not unusual that...
I'm not so sure you can, Tim.
It's not unusual for me, particularly during the cooler months of the year, that I'll be spending an hour 3 times a week in the mornings hiking through the local bush. And again, having that headlamp is quite versatile. or as I said, doing longer multiple day, multiple week hikes where I'll be doing periods of up to 3 hours early in the morning or later or early in the evening hiking at night time. So it's really up to you which way you want to go, but think about what it is you're going to be using it for. Think about what your budget is. And worst case, if you decide, yeah, I want a second headlamp, I want something a bit more powerful or something less powerful, you've always got a spare. Or if you want to invite someone else along, you've got a light that you can give them as well.
You can give them the low light headlamp.
Yeah. Okay, that's all on headlamps. We hope you've enjoyed. Bye for now.
And bye from me.